Welcome to a Brief History Conspiracy.
This week, the destruction of the Twin Towers.
If you're new to our channel, please like and subscribe. It really does help us out. So, this week we're doing the destruction of the Twin Towers. So we're going to be arguing, was it demolished in a controlled demolition, or did it just fall down all on its own? All on its own. Two flames flew and there's a massive fire.
I think all on its own was... Yeah.
So yeah, we're not going to be discussing the reasons why this week. It's just this demolition argument. And people have been arguing about this pretty much since it happened. There's lots of reasons why they think there might have been this controlled demolition. But first of all, we'll talk about Mr. Silverstein.
Oh, right. The leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex.
So, about 6 to 7 months before the Twin Towers, in around April, he agreed a deal with the local port authority that he was going to take on the lease for 4 buildings, a 99-year lease.
Yep.
6 weeks before 9/11, the contracts were signed. And he redid the insurance policies that were in place, because before that they didn't really have a great deal of terrorist cover. And he really ramped that baby up.
So, almost like he had some prior knowledge of forthcoming events.
This was also a man that had almost no history working in property. No history construction in property, so I really don't know what he thought he was doing when after the event, when he decided to rebuild the complex.
Yeah, so, Freedom Tower. Yeah,
it's almost like somebody was okay with him having this lease for some reason. But anyway... So, yeah, he leased 4 buildings, including the Twin Towers and including Building 7, which we're going to be discussing in another episode, probably the next episode.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
Probably. One of the big arguments people use against a planned demolition is that any sort of demolitions, things like that, particularly a building of this size, remember it's 110 stories, tallest building in the world, and for years when it was first built. Would take weeks or even months to plan.
Of course. For a proper controlled demolition company, they do a lot of planning, don't they? Into these before they.
Lots of drilling. There'd be holes everywhere. There'd be wires everywhere. That's the idea of it. If it was a planned demolition, do you think that's fair?
I do think that's fair. However, I do think money motivates, and if you're paying a demolition firm off a very large sum of money to do it much quicker, I think they'll accomplish what they're being asked for that large sum of money.
I think that as well.
And avoid all the health and safety stuff that they normally have to comply with.
That's where I was thinking. There's a difference, I think, between doing a planned demolition where you want health and safety and you wanted it and a nice, neat compression, or you just want the building to fall down.
Yeah.
Particularly considering that you have just hit it with a plane and there's going to be large fires.
Yeah, so maybe controlled demolition is not very fair. Semi-controlled demolition.
Yeah, just... and we know for at least 3 weeks before this was going on, there was work being done within the Twin Towers.
There certainly was, yes. There were regular nighttime visits when the building was shut by contractor companies that were going in, performing some kind of renovations, maintenance...
Well, the official
explosives.
The official story is that they were they were fireproofing the lift shafts. I would argue they didn't do a very good job.
Well, no, because apparently didn't the jet fuel, when the planes exploded upon impact, create a massive fireball that went straight down the elevator shaft,
Die Hard style,
and then caused a massive explosion in the lobbies, which could explain why some of the first responders, the firefighters, etc., were describing explosions in the lobby and basement levels, and why some of them had to have reconstructive surgery to repair parts of their face where pieces of wall have just blown out and smashed glass, smashed their faces. And although conversely to that, there could also have been some explosions in the basement that caused that.
Now there are some.
It's difficult.
There was some eyewitness statements that there was an explosion in the basement first, before the even first plane hit.
Yes.
Now you've told me things about vaults in the basement before that I didn't know about, but then I've seen images of now that with the doors bust open.
Yes, there was some gold looting that was being attempted, wasn't there, from under one of the trade centre buildings.
Do you think they would have the balls to do that, though? That if this was going to happen and they were going to that they would think, let's empty the vaults first. And these aren't little vaults. This vault was like something from, one of those old movies, like with a massive swinging door or whatever. It's not a small structure. They were massive. I think they genuinely have the walls to do that, to empty them first.
Money talks.
Minutes.
How much money's worth of gold was there in the vault that they were attempting to loot?
But that's the thing.
That's the real question.
You can't find out. You just don't know.
You can't find out. No. The only records were probably in Building 7.
I'm sure a lot of stuff was there on the quiet as well, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course, exactly. Yeah.
I actually think that if this was planned, right, one of the things I think about is that under World Trade Center 2 was the main water main.
Okay.
That is argued. I'm only mentioning Building 7 very briefly, but that is argued to one of the main reasons why Building 7 failed was because the sprinkler system had no pressure, so there's no water. But that would have affected the ability for obviously the Twin Towers as well.
Yeah, if it was connected as one big system.
Never mind the fire engines turning up. There was no instant sprinkler system because it's me thinking, if I know a terror attack is coming, or I've planned a terror attack of 2 aircraft going to go into the Twin Towers, and I want to maximise damage, would it be worth me setting off a small explosive in the basement to knock out the water main first?
Yes.
Possibly.
Yeah, well, if you want to maximise the damage to the building and therefore maximise casualties, yeah, makes complete sense.
So that's the one area that, I'd say I'm not a massive... The one thing with me with this building is it's not a normal building. Right? It's designed in a very odd way. It's got this very strong support structure in the middle with very long beams with the floors, and then this outer shell to maximise. It's like 95% air, this building, to maximise office space. It's designed to maximise office space.
Okay. Aren't most buildings designed to maximise the space
but then this
inside there?
Not 110 stories up though.
No, true. But I would argue that most buildings are mostly air.
True.
You don't want a building that's 50% building and 50% space, do you?
No, but I want a building that doesn't fall down.
Your square footage doesn't quite seem as good as the exterior of the building, does it?
It just seems to me that they pushed what was safe to create space.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I believe that in the middle of a densely populated urban area where they've built 110-storey buildings. Yeah, that seems reasonable.
But it seems to me that as well that because of the way it was built, maybe the way it fell looks weird, but maybe it looks weird because this isn't a normal type of building.
True, its architectural design is different, isn't it? Too.
It's unusual.
It's an unusual architectural design, isn't it? But you would have thought the architects and engineers that were involved in the design would still have had to meet normal stresses, strains, tolerances.
Well, I reckon a lot of the metal was at least, and a lot of it had backups built into it, so that the steel itself should have been at least 3 times stronger than it needed to be.
Right.
So even when the fires were burning, and they're saying the sort of temperatures they could get to wouldn't melt steel, but it would weaken it.
Would structurally weaken it still.
It would,
yes.
by about a third. It still should have been strong enough to hold up.
Okay.
But obviously it didn't.
No. So another interesting point would be, I suppose, the destruction of the towers. They appear to fall or fall to the ground, should I say, at near free fall speed, which is obviously near the same speed as if you were to drop an object off of the roof of the building.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense physics-wise when you're going through the path of the greatest resistance, having all of the steel girder structures and all of the concrete in the way.
There's a lot of metal in the way, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And I reckon it actually fell at about 2/3 that of free fall speed, but it was accelerating as it went down.
Yeah, well, no, of course it would accelerate as it goes down. But to accelerate at free fall speed at 9.8 metres per second squared would imply no resistance. In order to accelerate, and it didn't fall at 9.8 metres per second squared. It was slightly less than free fall speed. Yeah. I'm not sure I'd agree with 2/3, but
I reckon there's things. The inside of the building that you can't see as it starts collapsing, the smoke's coming. The inside of the building actually fell slightly slower. So the outside of the building was just under free fall speed. The inside and the core part of the building fell slightly slower. So that is now roughly 2/3 free fall speed.
Okay.
The first outer section I think took about 8 seconds to hit the deck. The inner core took about 11 seconds. So it was just that little bit behind it. But which would make sense, because whether this is a demolition or not, it would make sense because that's where the strength is. The core of the building is where the strength is. It's where the most metal is, it's where the most things.
Yeah, it's interesting they managed to measure the free fall speed of the inside of the building that they couldn't see.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, the speed of falling of the inside of the building that nobody could see. But anyway.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know how they did that. I've done my research.
Yeah.
But
okay.
I didn't think to actually to check how they knew that. That's a good point. That's a good point.
And I'd also expected to see some kind of perhaps distortion off of the central line of the building as it's demolishing.
Just as it started to go, WCT2 was leaning about 20. The top section, above the damage, was leaning about 22 degrees.
22 was it? Okay.
And then when it went straight down.
Yeah.
So, which again, it seems counterintuitive, but I wonder if it's one of these things that once it started to go, you remember in this building weighed 500,000 tons.
Yeah, okay. So it's some significant weight with a large gravitational potential
to tip. There's got to be enough force to make it tip, isn't there? If there isn't enough force to make it tip, what it's going to do is gravity is going to drag it straight down. And I wonder if that maybe
distorts our sort of idea our view of it, and the fact that they're saying that it didn't really fall at free fall then, according to the official side of things, 2/3 of free fall speed.
So we go on to explosions and the actual idea that this was a demolition job. Right. So there were lots of reports of explosions and these squibs. Have you gone down these squibs of these areas where when the windows blew out and it looks like there's explosive material come out. Right. So that's one thing. Also, there was a crap load of material that was blown, laterally out of this building and landed like 600 feet away. Which, on the side of it, sounds explosive. It sounds like some of these girders were shot out this building like a cannon.
Yes. Now you cannot explain that by gravity or by the building collapsing, unfortunately, because you cannot create horizontal motion in an object by gravity that acts directly to the centre of the Earth.
That's I'm not sure about that.
No, you can't.
Okay.
Gravity cannot create horizontal motion.
Have you ever been squeezing anything though, and it's broken, it's gone across the room?
Yeah, okay. So gravity couldn't be the cause of it, the force pulling everything down. Yeah. However, if there was some kind of compression of materials, it could possibly
exploded out.
Cause something to pop out, couldn't it?
Which I think there would be a compression though, isn't there? There's floors going bam, 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 bam.
There were sections of steel girders though found several hundred feet away in the sides of other buildings.
Yeah, 600 feet away is the one that was buried into the side of a building.
That's a big pop for a really heavy section of steel girder.
There's a lot of weight though, isn't there? There's a lot of force going on.
The forces are phenomenal. 500,000 tons
going on. Yeah.
And I don't think we could fully claim to understand all of the forces acting.
The other thing I was thinking about as well is that as these floors are collapsing, whether it's demolition or not, again, you're going to have a lot of air being pushed down very suddenly. I think that would, any weakness in any of the glass or anything, that would blow windows out and things as it was going down, potentially below where if the building's coming down here, say it's the 60th floor is collapsing, around the 30th floor you could see.
I don't think broken glass could be seen as evidence of the demolition. Glass is brittle, it breaks.
Yeah. I mean, this is quite special glass, isn't it? Because it's built on a it's designed to be very strong.
Oh, it is.
Because it's on a multi-story. But the other thing was, when the plane hit both towers, it created a shockwave through the tower.
Yes.
There was, down on the 30th floor, NIST, the people that then investigated this and tried to find out why it happened, they reported that people couldn't open their doors. The place had distorted.
Even on the 30th floor from the original impact. Okay, so because it's obviously caused some kind of distortion to the structure.
Yeah, like a shockwave throughout the entire building.
So the doors got wedged in the frame, basically, because the frames moved.
It had changed shape. Somehow changed shape, like in a car accident when you can't open the door, sort of thing.
It was basically the cuboid, the cuboid shape of the door. has then become more of a trapezium, hasn't it?
Yeah, sort
in
of
that
thing,
sense. Yeah, it's that doesn't surprise me.
I'm trying to remember what a trapezium is. Right, GCSEs, 15 years old, and you're
Is it a
trying to remember
trapezium?
shapes.
Or
No,
is it
you're
a
right.
parallelogram?
No,
Probably
you're
a
right.
parallelogram, isn't it? I think that's the one.
Oh
like,
God! You know I'm going to have you searching pictures for different shapes, but I don't know.
You know what I mean? Yes, it's shifted. The door frame, hence doors been open. Yeah, that makes sense though, because of the severe, I suppose 500-mile-an-hour jet plane hitting the building. It's again the force involved is
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's huge,
hard
isn't
to get
it?
around.
So there were several eyewitness reports from first responders, such as firemen and first aid or medical response, that reported several explosions in the basement of the towers, and I think and that was after obviously the first impact had occurred in the
I heard a
towers
story
impacted.
about how there was a group of people actually in the tower when it collapsed that survived, which seems mad to me.
They
But
must
they
have just
survived.
They must have just been in this amazingly
Yeah.
perfect space.
They were
where
reported to
everything...
have heard the noise of the bam, 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 bam of it coming from above.
Oh, the actual
sort of
So
thing.
the supposedly the floors being what's
Well-
the word, blasted off of the support columns, I imagine. But so also curiously on the day there are pictures of what appears to be molten metal pouring out of
You can see it coming out like a
windows
river,
and
it's
and
just
yeah, and
out the
it
window
literally
seams,
like
yeah.
a river of molten metal falling out of the building. And I suppose there's a couple of schools of thought on that, really. It's
Would it-
probably
would it-
some of the melted aluminium from the jet fuel from the
Aluminium
initial
does melt at
explosion.
about 600 degrees, which would have been within the
And-
possibility
Yeah,
for this
kerosene.
fire.
Kerosene's what they reckon about 750, don't they, degrees centigrade.
Yeah, the fire would have been in that, that
In
sort of region.
that sort of region. So it could have quite easily melted some of the aeroplane.
Yeah,
And then that was what we saw dripping from the side of the building.
yeah.
The other possibility is related to a substance used for controlled demolition. Thermite. Well, it's technically the actual. This is very.
That's lovely. You
the
have to be exact on this. It's technically thermite.
Yes, Thermite is the brand.
Yeah.
Thermite is the actual substance used
Yeah.
to cut through steel girders like a knife through butter.
Now, thermite is aluminium powder mixed with. It can be mixed a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's mixed with iron. Sometimes it's mixed with magnesium, and it can be mixed with boron and a couple of other things.
Mm-hmm.
But normally, the byproduct of a decent thermite explosion, or
Well,
it doesn't have to be an explosion. It can just be a.
It's not necessarily an explosion, is it? It can literally just be used to cut through. You can imagine it almost like in the movies, isn't it? Where you've seen it, where they just like put like plastic explosives like
Yeah,
round
and it just
something
sort of
in a
fizzles.
line, and they get it to fizz rather than do one big
Yeah,
explosion. Then it just cuts through, and you can actually see that in the aftermath of the towers after they've demolished, where you can see steel girders sticking up with 45-degree angles cut on
it does
them.
seem to be. Yeah. And one of the things with so when you have thermite, a byproduct of it is iron, liquid iron.
Yes.
And there's one argument to say that the material we see is either iron or steel because of the colour. The aluminium is a bright silver, and this was that orangey, like
darker.
liquid metal, like in a foundry sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's probably a darker than an aluminium, perhaps. Yeah, I do seem to remember that from the day from the.
There is one argument to say
images.
though that even though aluminium melts at 600 degrees, there was a theory put forward a few years ago, basically that when the plane went into the tower,
Right, yes.
the material then would have fallen above, and when it started burning, but it would have the material would have fallen on top of the kind of stifled the initial fire.
Yes.
But it would have basically created a like a blast furnace, so it would have allowed the fire potentially to get much, much hotter. And once you get to around 2,500 degrees, which seems a lot, but there are some records that say that the fire possibly could have got in areas up to this sort of temperature.
Okay.
Aluminium burns. And when aluminium burns, it's not nice. It's really very quite dramatic.
But we were seeing molten metal, which is only liquid metal. We weren't. So what you're saying is it burns at 2,500,
could have
turns
then
into
got
into a gaseous state at that.
And then it could have melted the steel. and then we would see iron, because of a chemical reaction, the
Right,
steel would
okay,
start
I'm with
breaking down potentially. You'd have liquid steel, liquid iron, liquid. It's a theory, but it's not one backed up by the evidence very well. Because
No, it's interesting.
when aluminium burns, it burns very bright. It's like magnesium burning, and we don't see that. So, but when we start talking about thermite and some of the evidence that was left behind in the dust and things like this, I have to start wondering when there's aluminium. And again, in the military, they built aluminium armoured personnel carriers.
Oh yes, yeah, you mentioned this. Yeah.
And when they get hit by anything heavy, the aluminium burns and it just sprays inside the cabin and it becomes like a battery box, and it's really horrific.
Yeah.
Aluminium burning is not nice, but also it creates lots of chemical reactions and weird things start going on. So it's worth considering.
Yeah, definitely worth considering. That it could have caused the temperature, and with those kind of temperatures, you then have more of an argument for the structural steel in the building losing its strength and rigidity, and perhaps even melting in parts. So then you do then obviously give more credence to the official theory of the destruction rather than it being controlled
Wish there was
demolition.
more evidence for it, really. And
Yeah.
also, the problem is, it would be quite an unusual event, even though physically possible for the airplane to go in thing. But we'd have to then argue it happened twice, which is potentially, I mean, if that's just the way things happen. But the argument is kind of that it's slightly unusual that it would have had to have collapsed in a certain way and this sort of thing. But it happened both times.
Yeah, and they both hit different points of the building, didn't they? As well. I'm trying to think what the floors.
North
the impact
face,
zones.
WTC1 hit the north face at between 99 and 93.
Yes.
Stories, and WCT2
was a lot lower, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was like
77 and 85.
Was it 77 and 85 it hit?
Yeah,
between?
so a
right,
fair bit lower. And that was obviously the one that collapsed quicker. The one that was lower. Maybe because there's more weight above the damage.
That would make more sense in the blast furnace theory, because you'd have more of the building above falling in onto the fire from the plane and the jet fuel, creating this compression and creating this sort of blast furnace within the building. So if that one went first, that does actually make sense then, because it was lower down, so there's more material above to help the blast furnace get hotter quicker,
burn through. Like I said though, I just wish there was more evidence for it, but there isn't. It's a theory, but there's very little evidence to back it up.
It's a better theory than a lot of the official theories I've heard. Though,
the official NIST theory for why it collapsed is basically that it's quite an unusual. You've got the core strength, and then you've got the outer structure steel, and then you've got floor sections that span across the two, and these are quite wide. They're quite unusual for this type of building. They're quite large floor spans.
Okay.
Basically, the steel was distorting like mad because the fires on the inside was much hotter than the fire on the outside. Right. Which kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah.
But about 150 degrees. So these long spans of steel that were supporting the floor, on the inside were distorting more because as they get hotter they expand.
Yep.
But on the outside they weren't distorting as much. So there was this internal collapse when the angle clip joints that connected these floor spans failed, and the floor collapsed. That then,
and this is the official pancake
then
collapse theory.
you have that pancake effect, and then once you get to enough energy, it just goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that their argument why perhaps you see at the top of the building at the start of the destruction the leaning, but not so much the leaning, more just like as the one floor collapses onto the next, then that floor collapses onto the next. You're seeing the horizontal ejections coming out before there's so much weight that it then just goes.
Yeah, it gets to the point where there's energy and it just goes. Yeah.
Right, okay.
That's the official version of events. And I can follow that. I can agree with that.
To some extent, I think it's plausible.
But that means this building was very badly designed.
Yeah.
The other thing is the fireproofing on this. The fireproofing normally for a steel structured building is basically that the steel is encased in concrete or encased in something. In this building, it's not. It's painted on. So when the plane hit, a lot of that fireproofing might have actually been shredded off anyway. But it is important to say that only we've argued this before, that 3 buildings have been lost to fire. Steel framed buildings with fireproofing have been lost to fire ever.
Yes.
And it was on September
11th, 2001, all three.
Yeah, I would argue that one building has been lost to fire. 2 buildings have been lost to a big plane hitting them and then a fire. And I think that is that plane hitting that building weakened sections of it. Even though the official reports have said it should have been able to stand, and then the fire finished it off. The building 7, which we're again not mentioning it, but we're with the commission report today. We're not mentioning building 7. That is the only building that's having steel frame building that's been lost to fire.
Yes, in the history of the world. Well, in our recorded history, going back what?
Oh, go back to Series 1 where we say
6,000 years, maybe.
They built one in Atlantis that was lost to steam.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe
they did.
Series
1, we discussed that. If we talk about the design of the building then, right? It was designed in the 60s and 70s, built in the 80s. It had been standing for 20-something years.
Yes. And designed to withstand impact from a passenger plane. Supposedly.
Apparently they'd argue that it was built into the structure. And to be fair, it did survive the plane
impact.
hitting it.
Yeah, it did. They both did, yeah, true.
56 minutes and 102 minutes. It survived. The design seems to be a big factor on why this building potentially fell.
If we're looking to go down the lines of the official theory, I totally agree. The design of the building. So maybe they didn't want to admit how poor a design the initial design was for a building in such a high rise 110-story building in the biggest metropolitan area in America probably.
Maybe considering the political situation post 9/11 thing, that they didn't want to stand up and go,
it'd be more the government.
This just wasn't a very good building.
It'd be the people suing the government and bankrupting the government would probably be the real issue.
That safety standards weren't high enough.
Yeah, and that they'd lost this person, that this person was injured, and this person can't walk for the rest of their lives. And so suddenly you're getting multi-million-pound compensation claims in from a lot of people.
Yeah, well, there was nearly 3,000 deaths on the day and another 10,000 injuries.
There you go.
Of different things. So there's a lot of people that, and then you get sued for emotional scarring. I was watching
exactly, and then you think about how many sort of members of the family will take it. Will it just be immediate family, or will the extended family also put in a claim? And then suddenly you can take that 13,000 people killed or injured and multiply it by 10, and you might get 130,000 people claiming. Yeah. And they're all claiming millions of pounds.
So we argue then that it was designed to take a hit.
Yeah, right? Well that's what we were told. Yes.
But then. I mean,
or what we've been told, yeah.
And this sort of thing has happened before. We've had lots of buildings burn for 17, 18, 19 hours and stand. Everything else is burned away, the metal frames. We've even had incidents of planes hitting buildings.
Oh, yeah, you found out about that one, didn't you? Was it the Empire State?
The Empire State Building was hit by a B-52. I remember this story from years ago, and I thought it was a little plane that had hit it because there was so little damage. So I thought it was a little like
Cessna,
like a little biplane or something, and it was in 1945. So I was thinking,
I'm guessing it didn't have a payload on when it hit. But
I hope not. No,
there'd have been a lot more damage. I would have thought.
It did hit it a lot slower. It hit it about 200 miles an hour. The aircraft that hit the Twin Towers were somewhere around 450 miles an hour, and would have been bigger aircraft, but not. So after the collapse, there was still. I mean, we're talking. There was heat remnants in the foundations for months afterwards that nobody seems to be able to explain.
In fact, there are even there are even witness statements that said that there was molten pools of molten metal still there in the debris.
Which again, a lot of them were found to be iron, which no one can explain, and that isn't necessarily like a conspiracy theory. There is molten pools of iron. And the only thing to think of is, well, the steel is iron, partly iron, so when it melted it broke down or whatever, but even that doesn't make sense because they were saying that it wasn't hot enough for the steel to melt. So, but you can see videos of them dragging girders and things out of the ground, and they just combust as soon as they hit the air. There was temperatures of 2,000-3,000 degrees. I mean, you can imagine the impact of that going into the ground and the friction and the heat generated. But for months, for like 2 to 3 months,
it doesn't seem right, does it? It doesn't sit very well. It
seems crazy.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then when they did start pulling the steel out of the ground, this should have been a crime scene. Yes, it was a crime scene.
Yep.
But it was never cordoned off. It was never done anything. They dragged the metal out of the form. They checked for bodies, basically. They were checking for things. And they shipped it immediately out to a hangar just outside New York. And then the steel was sold
exported
for recycling.
Yeah,
all
to
over
India,
the world.
China, predominantly China, I believe. But
yeah, 175,000 tons of steel was sold for recycling.
But you China lapped that up at a cheap price, didn't they, as well? I would
Well,
imagine.
You should think, where's this metal come from? I don't know. It's not come from 9/11, has it? No.
No.
Because we want full price for it. You wouldn't pay. I'm not sure about this. But a lot of the steel was actually, and a lot of parts of the building was actually saved. And then, like, every state in America had a piece of it as like a memorial. But that wasn't done until nearly 10 years after. It was like 2011 when they started doing this. They had plenty of time to check there was no evidence on that steel. Or before it was, is this bit clean? No, we'll send that to China. Is this bit, no, that's got a bit of bomb on it. We'll send that to India.
This one's got a 45-degree cut for a steel girder.
Yeah,
we won't send that bit.
Yeah, we'll put that on a boat and send it to somewhere else. There weren't the checks. This was a crime scene.
Yes.
It should have been treated like a crime scene.
Yes.
And it wasn't. They dug it up and they got it out.
Yes. And coincidentally, there were two companies used, AMEC and Bond Lovis, I think, and each one of them removed or cleared up one of the towers.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, I think it was AMEC had just recently done the recent renovation of the outer E-ring of the Pentagon, which was hit by the other plane.
No, that's not the same company.
Yes,
I haven't done the Pentagon research yet, so I'm going to double check that.
No, it's the same company.
Oh, Christ.
Yes. Oh, and I also believe that one of those two companies were also responsible for some of the construction crews that were going in at night to the Twin Towers to perform these maintenance operations.
So they know what they were looking for.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So that adds some serious weight to the demolition side of things. When you use the same companies to clean up that you use to set it up.
Right. So there's a couple of other little conspiracies that go around, but also a couple of points that make you wonder whether it was a planned demolition. For one, the buildings weren't up to code, and they hadn't been up to code for a long time.
Yes.
There was a loan to remove the asbestos from the buildings was going to cost £1 billion.
So there was some significant renovation costs that were very imminently rearing their heads.
It's also been pointed out that cancer rates in New York in this area have gone through the roof since 9/11, and that might have something to do with the massive cloud contaminated with asbestos that filled the entire city.
Possibly. I'm surprised there haven't been a lot of people suing in New York, the government, because of that.
They got to connect the two, don't they?
Who was it that did it recently? Somebody did it recently, didn't they? They managed to sue Monsanto for genetically modified crops that have caused cancer, and he successfully sued Monsanto.
Doing anything against Monsanto is
impressive. I know. That's what I was mentioning.
I think probably like all of the lawyers work for them, don't they?
Yeah, but I'm sure I read that recently. Someone managed to successfully sue Monsanto. So the tides are changing, people.
There's a famous photo where they call it like the dust girl, and there's the woman completely head to toe covered in dust. She died of stomach cancer a few years ago. That's quite an iconic photo. So yeah, I mean, we've all seen it when they'll come to do repairs on your house. Because where we live, we had a big explosion of houses in the 60s, and they did use a lot of asbestos. So now, whenever they do any work, they have to come, big masks, full headgear. They have to hoover because asbestos in the air will give you cancer. And like I said, the island was full of it.
Okay.
But that was just one part of the renovations that were going to need to be done.
Yes.
The rumours were that either within 25 years they were going to have to spend billions refurbing these buildings or tear them down.
So in that case, if you were Larry Silverstein, why the hell would you sign a 99-year lease on buildings 6 weeks prior to the destruction of the towers that then requires billions of pounds worth of renovation within the short-term future? You're surely going to be significantly out of pocket once those renovations are required. Yeah.
His actual deal was for 1.3 billion over 99 years, right?
Okay.
With the Port Authority that own the site. They only actually ever paid out 15 million.
Right.
So for a 15 million quid investment, he then sued.
Yep. The airlines.
And he said that basically he was covered for 3.5 billion, but he argued it was 2 terror events. So he tried to get 7 billion.
Wow.
He actually won in the end 4.6 billion. But then he sued, like you just said, he sued the airlines and said that your safety measures weren't up to scratch, so I want compensation, and won.
Wow.
He sued for compensation from a couple of other places as well, but and he basically amassed about 13 billion in the end.
Didn't realise it was quite that high a figure. I knew it was in the billions, but I didn't realise. And I knew that he'd managed to orchestrate it as 2 separate terror attacks to claim twice.
The little tinker.
Wow.
But he had to sue to get that. The insurance company wanted it's 1 terror attack, and he went no, and it's 2 buildings, and he's right. It's 2 buildings. So yeah, he was a little tinker on that one. Also, him and his son both had offices in the World Trade Center. Neither of them turned up for work that day.
Oh really?
No.
Oh, that's a surprise.
So
I would have put money on that if I, before the event.
Exactly.
So from being 15, from paying out 15 million and 6 weeks prior, and potentially being on the hook then for billions of pounds worth of repair. So actually, you were looking at a negative equity situation where you're just taking a lease out on buildings that you were then going to have to refurbish significantly, which would put you, I don't know, a few billion in the hole. He then comes out to the tune of 13 billion on top and becomes a billionaire overnight.
Yeah, he did well. And then obviously with with very little experience in residential, in building work and this sort of thing, he then set out the project to build Freedom Tower, Trade Center 1, and the other buildings that are there. I think it's 5, is it? Other towers. And he fought and scrapped all the way. He got lots of grants to build the Freedom Tower. They did kindly give the land for the museum. They donated that.
I suppose when you made 13 billion overnight, it's probably not such a bad thing to give a little bit back to society, is it?
Yeah, but he's had to scrap for money the whole way along this. He had 13 billion quid in the bank. He didn't seem to. He wanted to build Freedom Tower, but he didn't seem to want to use his own money to do it. So that's also maybe tells you a little bit about the man.
I need to look up his net worth prior to being the leaseholder on the World Trade Center complex.
Yeah, he was a millionaire.
He was a millionaire, but
he wasn't even the only investor.
A billionaire, was he?
He didn't pay the 15 million. It was him and a group of investors. So
he's almost just like a front then for the group of investors that were really behind the 13 billion
if
profit.
This was planned, it seems to have been planned on purpose. It seems to have been. He seems to have been positioned in the place where he took this lease on just to give them just enough time that if they did want to put any devices or weaken any areas or do something, that they had just enough time to do it.
I suspect that
and his price, 13 billion.
I suspect you can't find a list of these names of other investors anywhere.
No, it just says list of investors.
List of investors. Because I bet if you could find the list of names and it went Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, George Bush,
that would be a bit much.
Then it'd probably be a little bit too much and people wouldn't buy it anymore. So they put a front man there called Larry Silverstein.
If he knew, he has a business plan of, look, I'm going to come to trade centres. He could get investors that have nothing to do with the rest of the plan. He's the only one that needs to know. So, right now. There are some, before we just talk about what we actually think, there are some stupid conspiracy theories out there that I've just got that I want to put together really quickly.
Okay.
There's the Zim Corporation, right? Now this is peddled as being fact, and in a lot of YouTube videos it's peddled as being fact, and it winds me up, because it took me about 5 minutes to show that it wasn't.
To debunk it, right, okay.
The theory being that the Zim Corporation, which is actually the Israeli shipping corporation. It was the Nationalised Shipping Corporation.
Okay.
So they did shipping all over the world.
Yep.
It was denationalised and put on the stock market. Apparently the Rothschilds own about half of it, but you go and actually try to prove that.
Well, they had about half of everything supposedly, but
yeah,
try and prove it. So, it's
yeah. So the
same
Rothschilds
story,
own half of it.
Different asset.
The story being that they pulled out and broke their lease with the World Trade Center 2 or 3 weeks before the attack. So the story goes that they knew. The Israelis knew it was coming, so pulled their people out. And it's just not true. They didn't break their lease. The lease ended. They'd been planning for 2 years to move their headquarters, and that's all they did. And people moved in and out of the World Trade Center all the time.
I suppose it grabs a lot of people's attention because it's got some headlines there, hasn't it? It's the Jewish people, it's Israel, it's coincidental chronologically in terms of several weeks prior, even though you've just said it was planned for 2 years.
Yeah.
The fact that it was planned 2 years in advance, probably means that it's not connected and it is just a coincidence. But
they moved out their headquarters. They still had offices in the building. They still lost people on that day. But also a big thing of their computer records were there. So they actually, as a company, were quite badly harmed by this event.
Okay.
If it really was planned, they'd have moved more than just people out. They'd have moved the actual valuable information out as well.
Depends what that office was up to in particular and whether they needed to hide anything, but yeah.
Yeah, you would put all the information that you didn't want anyone to find there.
Yeah, especially if you knew what was coming.
We'll remove the profitable stuff, put the unprofitable stuff. Well, you know that crime we committed last year, let's put the records for that in there.
Yeah, that'll do.
So, it's a way of looking at it, yeah. That it was convenient for them. You know, there's 4 employees that we don't like. Put them to World Trade Centre for a bit.
We'll just reassign them to the Trade Centre
really too. You know that one that keeps saying he's going to whistle blow? Yeah, you got to transfer. Maybe. That's a way of looking at it.
Well, it's not like there's a history of meetings arranged in those buildings on September the 11th, 2001. But anyway,
there was quite a big meeting planned that day. But that's a whole other episode. So hold on for that episode when we get into the money aspect. Finally, there's a couple of myths going around as well. That it's just nonsense. One is that they weren't planes that flew in to the Twin Towers. It was CGI'd. I'm not even... the other one is that no one actually died on the day.
What?
Which is just... It makes no sense. Why would nobody have died?
But what about the victims of the families that... what's the word?
They were all staged.
Were all over... the American government,
all crisis actors,
while it stalled the 9/11 Commission report for over a year. The only reason that the 9/11 Commission report got off the ground was because of the victims' families
going on the news,
and saying we want an official report into this because of the lost loved ones. So so no casualties.
Nonsense, and that would assume that the government actually cared about people, and as well, which they, shocker, don't really. The innocent lives that were lost on that day. If this was planned by your government, don't care. There's a thing called groupthink, and there's a thing in psychology that you try to avoid in business, and that when businesses get together and they have groups making decisions, they dehumanise people quite dramatically. And this is why how big corporations can we'll downsize that company and we'll break it up and we'll just make that 100,000 people unemployed and don't care because they just look at the numbers.
Yes.
Your government thinks in a similar way.
Yeah, of course they do.
Sorry if that's a shock to you, but they do. They don't care.
No, of course they don't. And a good shepherd never sharpens his knife in front of the herd.
Yeah, exactly. That's all we're putting. So after everything we've just talked about, and we didn't even mention the red flecks of that was found in the dust.
Oh,
the little iron filings that were found that again make it look like thermite.
Indeed, yes, very much so. They did got some analysis of the dust from the New York City from September the 11th, and they do indeed find traces of the products of the thermite cutting through steel in the dust. Which,
so if you can believe that experiment, that study, which I've got no reason necessarily not to. I've never actually seen anybody come out and say that it's not true.
No, I just don't think it's been officially done in any capacity by any organisation like NIST or anybody. Because I suppose if they went looking down that road, it'd be very hard not to keep looking, wouldn't it?
Once you start mentioning things like thermite, magnesium stuff, it's hard not to. There are also some situations when steel can become oxidised and then its melting point drops dramatically.
Okay.
But
that
I haven't
requires
mentioned
a specific set of conditions.
Yeah, I haven't mentioned it because I've read it 3 times and I still don't understand. So,
okay.
But apparently there are situations when steel can become thick, and there seems to be large amounts of this oxidised steel at Building 7 as well. But that nobody, and that's official, nobody can explain. So I even listened to a debate where there was a debunker and he was very, very good, and even he went at the end, nobody, I don't know. I can't explain that. There seems to be lots of this steel that melts at like 600 or 700 degrees centigrade because of this effect, and I don't know why.
Okay, I'm curious. I hadn't heard of that oxidisation theory before.
It's not oxidising. It's some sort of chemical action with sulphur or something. I'm not saying that's so. I mean,
is this the one where they're trying to claiming that the sulphur impurities in the asbestos wall panelling was somehow lowering the melting point of the steel through an oxidation reaction?
That was another
of some
argument
description.
in the same debate. They mentioned that, and he said nothing to do with it. There's no chance that had actually any effect.
The quantities of sulphur that would be contained within the minimal quantities of sulphur that would be contained, I don't think there'd be enough there to cause the kind of reaction that you would need to significantly lower the melting point of steel from like 1,500 down to like 600-700 degrees centigrade.
Apparently chemically it can happen, but again, if it did happen in large amounts in the Twin Towers, I would again go, there's some sort of design flaw there. And that really should have come up in the NIST report, but it didn't.
Yes.
So what is your thinking? We've touched on everything there. It's incredibly difficult subject, so we might have missed
construction construction and destruction of the Twin Towers. I'd say I lean more towards the conspiracy theory in the fact that there was some kind of controlled demolition, just because of girders firing 600 feet across horizontally, across New York City, being impaled in other buildings. I'm not sure they can be thrown that far, although
some of them weigh 10-20 tons.
It seems unlikely to me. The evidence of the actual analysis of the dust showing the use of Thermite and the products from that reaction with the steel, including microspheres, isn't it, in the dust?
Iron,
the way the concrete dust cloud almost seems to have a pyroclastic type heat flow a little bit to it on the day as well, and almost looks like the pyroclastic flow of the gases after a volcanic eruption.
I think that was just pulverised concrete. Apparently people on the ground, it was warm. So it wouldn't be pyroclastic, but
so it was not pyroclastic then, perhaps. Okay,
it looks,
so maybe that's
but
not a great.
You didn't say
argument.
that. You said it looks like, and it's true. It does look like that.
Yeah, but I've got no idea from the video the heat of that. That massive
exactly.
of
but that's what it
does.
Look, it looks like a volcano going off.
It does look a little bit like that. Yeah. I just think that there's some interesting theories on the official side as well. I do quite like the blast furnace idea to get the temperatures up, which would then make the pancake collapse more plausible. So I think from the construction and the destruction of the buildings, it's very much up in the air. For me, it's quite close. Yeah, I could buy some. I don't buy the official 9/11 Commission report and the missing bits from it and that, but some of the things NIST say, they don't seem too implausible. They do seem plausible in their theory.
That's their job, to try to make something plausible, isn't it?
I suppose it is. Yeah, that's exactly what they do. So, and they have done that to make things at least seem plausible, if not, in my mind, what actually happened.
Yeah. And we have to remember as well the group of the 1,400 or so architects that have grouped together and are mandating another investigation.
Was it Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth?
Yes, because they don't believe it, and these are people that understand this stuff. That when they look at the stuff about this soft steel, they understand it.
Yeah. Well, they designed these buildings day in, day out.
3 times I read the same thing and don't understand it.
And they're responsible for the people's lives within the buildings that they design and manufacture. So if anybody's got a good grasp on this stuff,
they understand
are the
this
guys,
stuff, and they say they yell bullshit.
Yeah,
they're saying there's elements of this that aren't possible and have never been explained properly. Yes. And that makes me right. So my thinking is actually I don't actually necessarily believe this was a demolition. I've never really believed it was a demolition.
Okay.
Because a lot of the argument says that it couldn't have collapsed, and now I say no. I'm sorry, it could have done. It did. A plane went into this damn thing at 500 mile an hour nearly. There was this isn't. I keep going to this point of it's not a normal building. So if it didn't act and behave in a normal way, isn't really surprising. No. This goes back to some of this Apollo 11 stuff when they say, oh, some of the videos don't look right. It's because they're not on the Earth, they're on the Moon. It's going to look different. So it's an unusual situation. That's my point.
Okay, no, I think I agree with you a little bit there. I'd like to believe that it wasn't in any way a controlled or elements of controlled demolition on behalf of by the American government. I think people feel safer as well if that isn't the case, and it is just it was a pancake collapse of a poor building design that was said to withstand plane impacts, when in actual fact it was quite poor and it was going to always end up as a raging inferno that collapsed. Although it wasn't a raging inferno that collapsed, because there weren't raging fires, they were actually stifled fires.
Well, there was black smoke, which is indicative of an oxygen-starved fire.
Yes.
Maybe that is what we're talking about, this blast furnace idea there. That it
because it was oxygen-starved. Yeah, but you need oxygen for a blast furnace, don't you, to get the temperature
but if you get just like one jet, or coming from a very fixed point, that's how you create a blast furnace. Yes. You limit the oxygen, but you sort of
but then you've got
squirt it in like a turbocharger.
Yeah, you've got a turbo.
And you get much higher temperatures.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
So, but there are things that I don't... There's coincidences that make me nervous. For one, the sprinkler system didn't work because the water main was destroyed. Now, whether it was destroyed before or whether it was destroyed by the collapse, if it was destroyed by the collapse of the building, then why didn't the sprinkler system work? And it is very clear that the sprinkler system was
destroyed
damaged
prior to the destruction of WTC1 or WTC2.
You could argue that the plane went in somehow and that destroyed the water system, so maybe the sprinklers above didn't work, because literally the pipes were cut, sort of thing, maybe. But it seems more likely to me that the water main. But
they should have still worked below the impact zones in both the buildings, up to the impact zone.
But there's one thing that the sprinkler system failed. That's a big
coincidence.
Big flag to me that I go.
And it's not so much individual coincidences; it's the multitude of coincidences that we will later on explore through this series that then lead me to believe otherwise.
But my feeling is that the Twin Towers is different to what we're going to discuss in the next couple of episodes, in that it could have collapsed. It may not have been planned. I could see...
It's plausible that it collapsed.
I could see that this was a terror attack that the Americans knew was coming, and they took advantage of it.
Yeah, they let it happen in order to orchestrate
they could
situations
have even
globally.
Then gone in and weakened certain areas. Terrorists wouldn't have known anything about it. The terrorists just wanted to fly a plane at the building and make a big splash. They could have gone in and they could have, because they'd have experts looking at this and going, the building's going, but the buildings will stand. And then somebody else is going, actually, we don't want them to. It'll be a lot more dramatic if they fall down. And then all we have to do is weaken these points, and it'll go down like a pack of cards.
Yeah, that's definitely reasonable.
And that is a possibility for me.
Well, and then you think about all of the suspicious construction teams that were known to be visiting, not just in the weeks building up to 9/11, but going back years before 9/11. They've been having fireproofing upgrades corresponding to the impact zones on both towers. They'd only go up
to about 18, floor 18, with the improvements from the...
Oh, had they?
Was it 93, the first attack?
I think it was early mid-90s. Was it 95? I'm not sure.
Double check.
But I know what you mean. Where the guy tried parking a van up against one of the structural support columns in the basement with explosives in the van. Was that the one?
So after that, they started improving the heat proofing, but they'd only got up to about floor 18. 10 years later. So, I'm sure it's 93.
Yeah, I think you're right with 93. I don't know why I had 95, but I think you're right with 93.
I'm going to go, because on our last video, I said Operation Mongoose instead of Operation Mogul. I'm going with I got the M right, so I'm taking a whole victory.
Right, okay.
Still got it. So, if it's 93, you're going to hear me going, woohoo, on the edit. Right, so that's my thinking, to be honest. I think it is... When you hear these people saying that it's impossible these buildings collapsed the way they did, I don't buy it.
Yeah,
it is possible.
I think it might be possible. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's possible or plausible.
But it's also possible that... I don't think that there were demolition charges. I think there could have been... But I think it is possible that they went in and they weakened certain points to make sure that building collapsed. That is possible. I would, if there is evidence of thermite, that's what I think would have been done.
Okay.
And the Americans have got form on taking advantage of terror attacks. And actually, if you think about it, it's the perfect way to do it.
It is, because you're not then technically fully complicit, are you? Because you didn't actually orchestrate it. You were just complicit through negligence, which is the theme that you see through all of the different institutions on 9/11, complicit through negligence, basically.
We will do a video on FBI versus CIA.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
that they knew all the bits to this.
Well, just not even just CIA, the NORAD, the
NSA knew bits.
The Bush administration, just basically anybody that did anything on that day.
If the FBI and CIA weren't in competition with each other, then
can't put that on, can we? No. Sorry,
if the FBI and CIA weren't in competition with each other for the months leading up to this, they'd have rounded these 19 terrorists up, no bother.
Well,
but they were in competition. They didn't speak to each other.
Or if they'd used the Able Danger terrorist program that identified Mohammed Atta as early as May of 2000, they'd have also not granted them passports to come and learn to fly planes in America.
Technically allowed to use that though until after the events. And that's something we're going to do a video on, actually, the post events. And anyway, but we're getting off topic here.
We are.
So yeah, that's what I think. We'll see. In the next video, we're going to be doing Building 7.
Yes.
And then we're going to be doing the Pentagon. Now, one of these stories does have an argument to say, well, maybe it wasn't a terror attack. And one of them, there is absolutely no way in my mind is true. Guess which one is, in my mind, no way true? Pentagon or Building 7?
I think the Pentagon.
Yeah, there's no way that's true.
No.
So, so that's our next couple of videos, and then we'll go into the meat and potatoes of why we think this happened. So, thanks very much for watching.
Yep. Please like and subscribe.
We'll see you next time.
See you next week.
So I always have to do this with my hands when I'm talking.
Just hands.
Welcome.
Yeah, I don't know why you do that. Welcome.
The other thing I do when I do that is I go, really just helps out.
Please, please. You put your hands together and almost like you're begging.
It's a little nod of the head I do. Go on. Go on.
Go on. Please.